Have you ever wondered how you can unlock new opportunities and knowledge that can truly change your journey as an African immigrant? Then, you're in the right place. Welcome to the AIM Expert series, where we bring you insightful sessions, packed with practical strategies from top experts on topics that matter most to you. So, if you're looking to grow your career or understand the US system, then grab a chair and don't go anywhere. Now, let's get started on today's session.
Conference will now be
Yes, it
recorded.
will now be recorded. So anything you say from henceforth is on the record. Ken and okay, anyway, you get the point. But we're recording the call, so I want to let you all know. But thank you all for being here. We did have our masterclass last week, and so it's been a couple of weeks since we had our masterclass. So it's good to be back and to see everyone be in the room and be a part of this session. If you are new to the African Immigrant Collective, one of the ways we drive our mission, that is to ensure that we are systemizing information and ensure and that the African diaspora, we get access to relevant information. This is one of our vehicles for doing that. So every week we have a masterclass series where we have expert presenters who we call our knowledge partners, who come, with a lot of experience, and they come share from the expertise to really serve the community. So that's one of the ways that we do what we do. We're able to drive our mission is by bringing these incredible people to you all to share, to teach, and they do it, on their time and their own dime. So we're grateful for our knowledge partners and our presenters today. So without further ado, I will share other things going on within AIM later on after their presentation. But before, just a few things to keep in mind. If you do have questions as the sessions go on, I would say let's use the chat more, except our presenters decide to open up the floor for conversations. I'll recommend avoiding interrupting during the sessions. Make sure we just use the chat, and we always ensure we get plenty of time towards the end to answer questions and to engage, so that the session can flow well. Leverage the chat. And lastly, please, while this session, they're experts and all, we always want to do a disclaimer. None of the things that are going to be shared today constitute legal advice or professional counseling. Still seek professional, expertise for your own unique situations. If you want to have further conversations outside of this meeting, that is okay. But AIM is not liable for any decisions you make following the information. AIM and our knowledge partners are not going to be held liable for any things that you do with the information. So take the information, but still do your research and still get experts. Still consult with professionals for your own specific situation. With that said, I will hand over to our presenters today, and I'll let Letitia drive the introduction. So Letitia is a veteran presenter here in our masterclass series. She's always doing all of our mental health conversations. She's led and been a very prominent voice for us in the community. So I'll invite Letitia to take you from here.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nandi. Thank you for always welcoming us to this space and providing the space for us to have these conversations. So today I am here before you presenting this topic of understanding learning disabilities, neurodivergence, and other overlooked mental health challenges. Even the title, I think there are so many ways to introduce this topic, but I think as long as you are familiar with those terms, neurodivergence, and we will unpack a lot of them as we go during this conversation, we will be able to get more clarity as to what do we even mean when we say learning disabilities or neurodivergence. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into other overlooked mental health challenges. So without further ado, I'm going to do our introductions. So my wonderful co-presenter today is Fallon Nelson. She's an ADHD coach and CBT informed consultant based in the UK. So just brief introduction about me. I'm Leticia Tokplo. I'm a therapist and I am pursuing licensure here in the state of Georgia. That's what APC means. I am an associate professional counselor, and just a little bit more about how these things work is that for a counselor to be a licensed professional, they have to work under supervision for some years. So I am doing that right now and looking to attain my professional license hopefully by next year. So the reason why I take a pause to say that is because I'm hearing a lot more conversations about who do we even go to when we're having these issues. So that's why I'm explaining a little bit more what the terms mean. So when you see a fully licensed clinician will have LPC behind their name, and you also have the coaches, the consultants that work in specific areas of mental health. So when you have a specific issue, it's important to know who to go to. So I hope this helps a little bit to clarify that. And if there's more questions about how do we identify who to go to, what professional to reach out to when we have different issues, we can talk about that a little bit more at the end. And I also always open up these conversations by saying that I am also a woman of faith. I am a follower of Christ. And you will hear me share about that also throughout the presentations because I do not think, that God is outside of that conversation of mental health because we're not just our mental, we're not just our minds, but we're also mind, body, and spirit. And all those things work together for our good. And sometimes they are disintegrated and we need to put them back together. So that's always part of the conversations that the conversation that I want to have. And you will also hear me talk about my background as a first generation immigrant. So all those things are part of my positionality statement, and most clinicians have one about what's the lens that they come from when they share information. And like Dr. Nandi said, none of this is this is not therapy. This is just presenting knowledge and information and the wisdom that comes after that. What you do with that information is, for you to decide on your own, to use your discretion, to use your judgment, and to consult your to as even as God about as for discernment as to how you use this information and seek professional help where needed. With that said, I'm going to let Fallon introduce herself.
Thank you, Letitia. So, hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from today. And feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Would love to know. But yes, as Letitia said, my name is Fallon Nelson, and I'm an ADHD coach and consultant. So, I'm a workplace consultant where I basically help workplaces raise awareness when it comes to neurodiversity and help them make their workplaces more inclusive. I'm also a content creator and a speaker. So my background is really in cognitive behavioral therapy. I've been in the psychology field for the past decade. So that's really where my expertise lies. And I'm really passionate about having these conversations and opening them up in our community. From somebody that comes from a Jamaican and Ghanaian heritage, I've realized that there's a gap that needs to be filled when it comes to having these conversations. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see. So, before we dive into our stories, please let us know where you are chiming in from in the chat. Those who just joined, please say hello and announce yourself. I can't see the chat, but then if you put something in the chat, Dr. Nandi will tell me that you're here so I can say hello. All right, so let's dive in. One of the reasons why this is important for me is because of personal experience and also just what I'm seeing as I am interacting with clients. So today we're going to talk about grief and burnout, as well as those learning disabilities and neurodivergence. And the reason why I really wanted to touch on grief and burnout is grief, for first off, is something that is seldom discussed, but it's such a human experience. I don't think anyone is exempt from it. And maybe we don't always know what it entails, or we only think it's one thing or another. So um, grief is not just about, it's not just an emotion that comes up when you lose somebody, but also it could be the loss of a position, of a role, of of a business. It could be the loss of many things. Uh, it's really the loss of anything that was important to you. So that brings up that sentiment of grief. So my story is that when in 2022, I was in school completing my master's degree, and I was doing all the things. I had just completed an awesome study abroad. I was preparing to start my internship. So this was like my last year. It was really intense. I was excited to graduate soon. My dad was already planning a year before to come to my graduation. We were having all these exciting conversations about what's going to be next. Then all of a sudden, he passed away. And what happened is that in the midst of all of these things, and, all these plans that I had for my future, it just felt like things started falling apart. So I was not only doing at that time, I was not only doing school full time, but I was doing my internship, but also working full time. So it was pretty much like me having three jobs and also having experiencing that deep loss. So, needless to say, that I was devastated. And even though I took some time off, I went to grieve with my family, emergency travel, and all of that. And the immigrants will understand what I mean by that, where, like you don't even know how it happens, but you just know, like I know the grace of God got me there, and I was able to go bury my father and everything. But it was just a time where I felt like I was everything was just cloudy and foggy. And what ended up happening later is that that brain fog continued later on, and it started manifesting in different ways, which now led to the burnout that I experienced. And it was, for me, it was a lot of physical symptoms. It was all of a sudden I had all these hormone issues, chronic fatigue, brain fog, and imagine trying to complete a degree with all of those things happening, and the emotional side of grief, and doing three jobs. So that's where the burnout came. So that's the part of my story that I wanted to introduce to you guys, to so that you can get an idea of what I mean by grief and burnout. And we'll dive in more into the information about that later. So now I'm going to ask Fallon to share a bit about her story also.
Okay, yeah. So a little bit about me without going into too much, because I could talk about this for hours on end. But last year, I actually got diagnosed with ADHD myself, and it really opened up my eyes to life from a different lens. It did bring a sense of relief, in the sense of it helped give me the language to understand myself and have the language to explain what I was experiencing, because for a long time, I felt like there was something, I just couldn't figure out what it was. I was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, but none of those things really fit. ADHD was always missed. It was never something that ever came up in conversation. And growing up, what I was told ADHD looked like definitely did not look like me. So it wasn't something that even occurred to me. But then alongside that, it also came with a sense of grief, shame, guilt. I almost felt like I was grieving the Fallon that I could have been had I had the support that I needed, because it almost took me getting to a point of self-destruction before the conversation of ADHD even came about. So through that, it's really it's really made me realize that if I got missed for 30 years, then who else is getting missed? And how did I get missed for 30 years? Because ADHD is something that stems from childhood. It's a developmental condition. So through that, I realized that there's a gap that needs to be filled. There's conversations that need to be had. There's awareness that needs to be raised. And that's what's really given me that passion to open up these conversations.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Like you said, who else is being missed? And this is why we want to have these conversations in this forum so that we can catch these things early. I really feel for our children and, really want to present this information so that we can be proactive and we can have some preventative measures that really you know, uh, provide the structure that we need to support them, to support one another before it gets to that point, where that point of, like where we're in crisis. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about what again, I chose that title of learning disabilities, but it is not just that. These are what we call in the mental health field neurodevelopmental and neurocognitive disorders. And examples of neurodevelopmental disorders are autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Learning disorders is one of them, including dyslexia and things like the Tourette's syndrome, which is more, it also has like a motor component to it. And then we have the neurocognitive disorders that are more Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, which is TBI, Parkinson's, which also has a motor component, where people get the shaking, and then dementia, which has a lot of issues with memory loss, Huntington diseases, and etc. So what really differentiates them from a basic level, we're not going to go too deep into these for the sake of time, but what really differentiates them is that usually the neurodevelopmental disorders are usually have onset during childhood, and the neurocognitive disorders are usually more older age related disorders, except maybe for traumatic brain injury that can happen at any point in the lifespan. Even when people have strokes, they can have a traumatic brain injury after having a stroke, or when people go to war or experience like a fall or an accident or something like that. That's also places where people can get a traumatic brain injury. And there's so many ways that those things can happen. And sometimes it could be even like during sports activities, and people have a mild concussion, but it's later on that you start seeing the impact on their brain function, on the mind, and things like that. Um, and I also want to chime in a little bit about dyslexia and learning disorders, where this is something that I think is often missed in our African communities. I always think about, the children where, especially when we're in Africa, where at a very young age, they kind of just put them on the side and say, oh, this one doesn't seem like they're really catching it at school. Let's send them to an apprenticeship or something. And then that child is kind of just like left behind, and they're like a mechanic, or they learn a skill or trade versus going to school. Whereas if those um, conditions were studied, or that we had structures where they had the support that they needed, maybe they could succeed in a different way, or they would have the support needed to actually be able to do formal education. So that's always something that I think about when I think about dyslexia. Some people experience the words moving off the page when they actually look at it, but then they don't have the words to explain that. And imagine how many kids are left behind because they're experiencing those things. and the autism spectrum disorders. We're hearing a lot more about that, about neurodivergence, and there's so many different ways that these things show up. And honestly, even in the mental health field, these are things that are still being studied and still being understood. We're understanding more and more about how these things combine and how they show up differently in different people based on their environment and all of that. So this is just to give you an this is just to give you an overview, and then we'll dive a little bit more into ADHD because Fallon here uh, is specialized in that, so she'll be able to give us more information. And one thing I also want to say is that all these disorders, they're classified in like there's a codification system called the DSM-5 that professional counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists use, and all these is they are even evolving. They're always doing research about how these things manifest and coming up with the criteria that forms those diagnoses. So these are things that we can't even, this is just a scratching the surface of what these things can be or could be. So if you have more questions, we can talk about that at the end. And I'm just curious to hear from you guys. Have you guys seen any of these, or have you encountered them personally, or seen other people encounter these things? Not to go into too much detail for the sake of this platform and this open forum, but just like, was it you? What happened? And is it ongoing, or have you received help? That would be sufficient for this. So let's hear a little bit from the group. Please feel free to unmute. Anyone?
I can speak definitely around friends, like I think what you should put in the chat too.
Mm-hmm.
It's again like it's very common now. It wasn't something that we saw or knew of from back home,
Yeah.
and so it's a whole new experience for a lot of people. Who are giving birth to kids. So a lot of people are more aware now, and I think they give them some sort of peace, like what Fallon mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so but when it comes to the stigma of it as well, people are trying to not want to know what it is because they don't want to have a label to them. So that's why this conversation is very important
Yeah.
overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really important point, the labels, right, that we might put on ourselves or on other people because we're presenting these symptoms. Okay, we'll come back to that. Thank you for sharing. Let's see. All right. Fallon, please take it away.
Okay, fab. All right, so what is a ADHD? So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition and it tends to start in childhood, although a lot of people don't tend to get diagnosed or recognized until adulthood. It affects the brain's ability to regulate your attention, your activity levels, and sometimes impulse control as well. So it can affect things such as your organization, memory, motivation, and emotional regulation. But one thing to highlight is that ADHD is not necessarily laziness. I know as well sometimes parents tend to blame themselves that they feel like they've done something wrong. It has nothing to do with parenting, and it's not a lack of discipline. It's just your brain's ability to regulate attention and different organization and your executive function. So it doesn't have anything to do with your intelligence, your ambition. I mean, some of the most successful people in the world also have ADHD. So
Yeah.
just highlight that.
All right. Next.
Yeah.
Uh, mm.
Okay. So one thing that I learned through getting my diagnosis, which I didn't know beforehand, was that there's actually two types of ADHD. So there's the predominantly inattentive type. So this tends to be the one that gets missed the most. It shows up more subtle. So for example, it might be signs of forgetfulness or disorganization, or you get easily distracted, or you just seem very reserved, a lot quieter. You might be seen as the daydreamer, have difficulty starting tasks, sustaining tasks, or staying on track without getting distracted. And then you have the hyperactive, so more impulsive, more physically physically aware. Like people can see more easily than they can see the inattentive. So for example, you might appear very restless, you can't sit still. When I was growing up in school, what ADHD was, what I was told ADHD was, it was a Caucasian boy in the classroom messing around, distracting everybody, hyperactive, wouldn't sit in one place. That is what ADHD is. That is it. That was my understanding, and that is what I've known for the past 30 years until literally I got my diagnosis. So so that's the type that tends to fit the stereotype more of what people assume ADHD is and how it shows up. But there is actually two sides of it. What we've also seen is that females are more likely to be inattentive, which is another reason why they're much more likely to be missed than boys. But there are some people as well that have the combination of both. So they have a combination of the inattentive and the hyperactive types of ADHD. But again, things can differ. So in terms of age, your environment, the amount of demands on a person. So for example, so I was working in the NHS, which is our National Health Service, for a very long time as a talking therapies practitioner. And when I had an open plan office, I found it very, very difficult to focus and to do my work. So I'll be going home pretty much every day with a whole load of work still left to do because I couldn't focus. There was too much distractions, people getting up, people having conversations. It was too much. But when I had my own office and I was able to work kind of more on my own time, structure my diary how it needs to be, that worked a lot better for me, which is why, again, I think it's important for us to help workplaces make offices or their environment a lot more neurodivergent inclusive, because it's not set out for neurodivergent people at all. So so that's the two sides of how ADHD might present itself. Next one. Okay, so living with ADHD. So one thing that, because sometimes people assume that ADHD only affects your concentration and your memory. So you tend to forget things a lot. You might walk into a room and completely forgot why you went in there. But it can really have an impact on how somebody manages their day-to-day everyday life. So, I've touched a bit about executive functioning, how it can, for example, your organization, starting tasks, being able to prioritize tasks as well. Like, what is actually more important for me to start right now? So what tends to happen a lot of the time, you might have something that you're really interested in and you prioritize that, even though it's not actually as important as what you need to be getting done. So you might have an email that is urgent that you need to send off, but you're putting it off and delaying it because you found interest in something else. So you can hyperfixate on something and you can completely dissociate with something else, and finding the balance of what needs to be prioritized and what doesn't can be an issue. It can affect your working memory, also your time awareness. So ADHD has become a buzzword, and a lot of the times it's because people always like, I'm late because of my ADHD. And I don't want to use that as an excuse, but it is a real thing. Time blindness. So being able to actually work out how much time you need to complete a task, or how much time you need, for example, to plan a journey to get somewhere. So that can be an issue. Again, like I said, task initiation. Also the motivation and reward system. So with ADHD, you tend to kind of lack dopamine. So that also ties into it, and your emotional regulation, sleep and energy, and also your relationships and self-esteem, which I'll talk about a little bit more when we go forward.
All right. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about grief and depression. So when we talk about, we hear a lot of those buzzwords, right? And I wanted to just give a quick brief of what's the difference, because is grief depression? Is it something different? But what I want you guys to just keep in mind about grief is that it's usually connected to a specific loss or the memories of specific events. It's not, whereas depression is more of an ongoing feeling of like loss of pleasure about life in general, feelings of worthlessness, and it can last weeks and months. And depression is usually persistent, where that person has that feeling of just being, like down in the dumps for a long stretch of time. Whereas grief might come more in waves, and it comes with seasons and particular dates, or different memories trigger the remembrance of the thing that was lost. And the thing about grief is that it looks different for everybody. It looks different based on the person, based on the relationship they had to the object that they miss or that they lost. And grief sometimes has those little pockets of joy where you remember like the good things about the thing that was lost or the person that was lost. And it's very variable as to how people feel it. Some people might feel it in their body, whereas other people might feel it more emotionally. Some people, it might just be psychological. And for some people, it's, just like, I don't know how to explain, like reactions, kind of like sighing uncontrollably, right? Because they're just thinking about that lost thing or that lost loved one. All right. So, what is grief? Some define it as a painful emotion of sorrow caused by the the loss or impending loss of anyone or anything that has deep meaning to someone. It could involve the connection or attachment or loss of identity that the person has towards something or someone. It could include like shattered dreams or unmet expectations, and sometimes grief can even look like relief. And I think that's where it's hard for some people when they don't necessarily feel the pain and the sorrow about grief. They're even confused as to, is this grief? Like, do I, or people might experience relief when it was someone who was actually abusive towards them, or if it was a situation where the downs ended up outweighing the ups, or the the sorrow that was attached to the situation actually outweighed the gains of the thing or the situation. So sometimes grief can be complicated in that way, where it brings mixed feelings or the loss brings mixed feelings. For some people, it helps them to consider that grief is just love with no place to go. And there are also mixed opinions about that, because again, for some people, grief is not was not necessarily tied to love for that person or that situation, even for the loss of a job, right? Because even when you find yourself in a situation where the job was becoming really heavy, it was a toxic situation, or you were having or you wanted a better position and all of that, it still hurts when you're laid off or the business shuts down or and things like that. So sometimes grief can come with mixed feelings. All right. And I wanted to touch a little bit more about what happens when we lose a loved one. What does grief look like in that situation? It could look like different things. We usually often grieve the roles that the person played in our lives, the way they made us feel, the future we imagine with them, whether that's holidays, milestones, everyday routine. Um, one thing that I really missed with my dad, for example, was we were planning my graduation, him coming over and doing and celebrating with me, and that didn't happen. So there was a bittersweet feeling, even though I completed and I was able to finish that year as planned. Um, though with pain and suffering, you know I wanted him to be there and to witness that with me, and he wasn't able to. But then I still, you know like, did something to remember him on my memorabilia that for that celebration. Let's see. And then the identity we built around them, because often that person gave us, or like, a title, right? I was a daughter to my father. He was my biggest supporter. So what identity do we attach to that person that we lost? Those are often the things that we need to grieve. So, um, just to talk a little bit about the types of grief, there are many different subtypes that we will not dive in today, but just generally, those that are actually classified as disorders in the DSM are prolonged grief and complicated grief. So prolonged grief would be if the intense symptoms, which are, the loss of pleasure, maybe irritability, or a loss of appetite, and just the memories feeling so overwhelming that the person is not able to function and do their daily activities anymore. Beyond 6 months, for example, that would be classified as prolonged grief. And again, I don't want to go too deep because I don't want anyone to be self diagnosing, because it looks different for everyone. So once you actually consult with a professional, they can tell you what it is. And the reason why I'm giving you these guidelines is so that you know when to start asking for help. So, complicated grief is one of those where there is, yes, the prolonged grief, as in timing is involved, but also it can be a combination of a lot of different things. It's not just the loss of a person, but it could also be the loss of a situation, of a job, or many different losses back to back. And now something that was supposed to be tied to a specific situation is now just persistent for months, for years, until the person, starts feels the start feeling the symptoms. But before it becomes complicated, you definitely want to seek help. And just to give you a general idea of what healthy grieving looks like, it's that bittersweet feeling where you can integrate the memories of the person, of the loved one, with also the pain or the suffering that comes with the loss. All right. So, just to hear from you guys a little bit, how have you dealt with grief in the past? Let's have maybe one person to share quickly, and we will move on. Please feel free to unmute. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. I think we're just
Yeah.
reflecting and thinking.
Okay.
Again, I believe that with grief, these are new concepts. Well, a new
Mm.
concept to me. Let me speak for myself.
Mm.
Typically, when something just happens and everyone just keeps on moving,
Yeah.
man up, woman up, and all of that thing. I can't even imagine what the men too are going through. And so
Yeah.
this is new language for a lot of things people are going through. And I think what's a little bit not scary, but something to remember that you mentioned is it takes a while for it to, like, it can manifest. Someone might look happy right now, and there's something happen, and they might be triggered, and you don't know what the root cause is. So really, just that self awareness, like you mentioned, is so key and important. and
Yeah.
giving room for people to also heal and not try to fast track their healing. So I'm just really learning a lot from what you and Fallon have been speaking so far.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for saying that. And I think I know this is a lot of information also, and that's why I want to pause and hear from you guys because I know it can be a lot and it can be a bit like, oh wow, which one? And then you might start seeing things, right? Or like thinking, oh, is that me and all of that. But then the once you understand, right? Once you gain that awareness, I think it's um, like a good place to start and to start reflecting and to start paying attention to what is it looking like for you. And one thing that I remember from, and not just like personally, but like I've seen even in a lot of situation where someone dies and then the family is trying to cry and they're like, no, 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 no. Don't cry. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. They wouldn't want you to cry. And we do that so much as Africans, right? Because we're thinking, oh, if we give the person strength and courage, then they're not going to feel the pain anymore. But then that's actually suppressing their emotions and not helping them move through the grieving process. All right.
Sorry,
Let's
before you continue,
go
maybe
ahead.
just to speak a bit more on this part about our culture and how we handle people that are grieving, especially also from a Christian faith perspective.
Yeah.
Um, because we also have, like, I've been part of a lot of, these moments where there's, families are going through, and, we have scripture like, hey, don't grieve a certain kind of way because we know they're in a better place, So how do we, I guess,
Mm,
balance those conversations, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that the way the Bible puts it is that we don't grieve like people who do not have hope,
Yeah.
uh, because we know where they've transitioned to.
Mm,
Balancing that, like, I feel what I feel, right? And
right.
so I guess my own experience with grief would be that I lost two close family members in 1 year, and that was
Yeah.
year of graduation for me as well. Mine was 2008.
Mm,
My my dad's mom
mm,
died in June, um, middle of the year, just right as about to graduate, and we just got over that. And well, not my dad's older brother was the
mm,
one that died first. He died in, like, June, and so we were still trying to get over that. We had to do just right after I graduated, from, or I was about to graduate, and this man had been very visible all my life. Um,
mm,
and then he passed, we buried him, and all of that. That was the first closest loss I had felt, to
yeah.
someone I knew. And then a few months later,
Mm,
my grandmother fell sick. That's my dad's mom. So I
mm-hmm.
think the loss of the son, she didn't take it well because that was the one who stayed in the village that was taking care of her. My
Yeah.
dad was in the city working; he was sending money and all of that, but the older brother was at home, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, was December just before Christmas, like it was December 21st of
Mm,
that same 2008. Uh, my grandmother died. So
mm,
now we're like prepare for Christmas, and Christmas plans changed to burial arrangements because
yeah.
somehow my dad didn't want to go into the new year with planning the burial in the new year. So we buried her right before the new year. Um, but that was just intense back to back, like standing in front of a grave site twice in 1 year. I was like, I'm
Mm,
coming here too often, So but two people who are like very visible in my life up until that moment. Um, but then that conversation around, we don't grieve a certain way. And I was like,
mhm.
what we feel, what we feel. Like, I'm not going to see this woman again, and that's real. Like,
Right.
So I want to just maybe stay on there a little bit, especially with on the, I guess, Christian faith
Mm-hmm.
plus managing grief? How do we, have that balance,
Yeah,
in the work
yeah.
area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think when it comes to grief, we forgot that Jesus wept, right? Like, even though he knew he was going to resurrect Lazarus, he wept because that was his friend. And he expressed his emotions even in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was taking on all the suffering for the whole world. Imagine, however each one of us suffers, because that's part of life, right?
Yeah.
Imagine someone taking all of that on them, and even the things that we cannot imagine and have never been through. And he's saying, if this cup can pass from me, not because he thinks he can handle it, but because he knows that that would separate him from his father, right? Because he's like taking on all this like the destruction of the world, really. Because, to be honest,
Yeah.
I personally think, this life that we're living, this was not the original plan. Right?
Yeah.
So, like, when you think about that, then he's able to, even our savior, who is the strongest, almightiest person that ever existed, can take that on and still show his grief. How much more us, who are just plain human, with all our limitations, with all our frailties. And also, I think we also forget that in Isaiah 53, it says that about Jesus again, that he was acquainted with grief, a man of sorrow. So when you think about that, like, grief there means, um, it means so many different things, but like a malady, with sickness, all the things, affliction, right? All the things that can afflict us, and that's grief in the different ways that it shows up. And I think we also underestimate when someone else in our families, or someone that we're connected to, is going through things, is going through these different things we're talking about, or all these other mental health issues. It creates some type of grief, because it creates those patterns of under functioning and over functioning with other family members. Because if someone is not, and let me just put an asterisk, it tends to create, maybe some other people don't experience that, but from my experience, that's usually what it creates. And it changes family roles and family structures. Grief changes family roles and family structures. I think where we can all understand, the missing of a key piece of a family, like, this person really held the family in a certain way. And for some people, it's financially, like you're saying, that a whole family's uh life source, sustenance financially is gone. Like, what do you mean? So what do people do? And that's why you see people rolling themselves on the floor, and they're not wrong for doing that. Actually, expressing grief in that way is actually more healing than suppressing it, right? And I think we forget that there's an in between. And because we don't want to see, most people are uncomfortable with seeing these open displays of grief, they actually, try to suppress it versus letting people experience it fully. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, that's helpful. So let them cry.
Let people cry. Let people cry.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sure. All right. So quickly, let's go to burnout. So burnout is actually not officially classified in the DSM yet, but I really believe that by the next time they pull out a new edition, that would be a thing, because a lot more people are talking about it. But it's considered a stress or occupational based disorder, like chronic work stress. And I always like to share this diagram about what that looks like. So stress might be, just difficulties, the hardships of everyday life, like people often say the paper cuts of life, where the pot is kind of like, simmering, the heat is there, but you're still managing and everything. Then distress is when it's boiling over and you're starting to feel, the rush, always rushing, there's so many competing demands and all of that. And I think that's also usually the place where you will see a lot of caregivers juggling, managing a lot of different things, competing demands, and always like in that state of, chronic activation, right? Because they need to be juggling all these things. And then by the time the disorder comes, when it's not managed, um, when it's not there's no support that is around that stress, then and when disorder comes in, that's when you see that it starts interfering with a person's ability to function. And that's like the pot that's like overboiling until it's almost burning. So when it comes to any mental health disorder, what I say generally, uh, for of course, being mindful that you're not self-diagnosing, but you're asking and seeking professional support, is to consider how long has this been? How long have I been feeling this way? So consider duration, consider the intensity of the symptoms. Is my, am I going from 0 to 100, so quickly that, now it's turning into like rage and violence, and there's so many nuances to this, but just for the sake of an example. And then the impact on daily functioning, if someone is no longer able to take care of themselves, to take care of the environment, to take care of their daily task, that's when you start seeing the impact on functioning. Okay, so now that we've talked about all these issues, and I try to give a lot of information like this just to provide general knowledge, but again, as we have more of this conversation, I'll be speaking less and less about the issues, because we already have this content now where people can go back and review it, and then we'll talk more and more about what is it actually looking like in our communities. That's the hope for moving forward. So quickly, when we talk about the recovery for grief, I would again acknowledging that grieving surrounding a loss is normal, letting the people cry, like we talked about earlier, then acknowledging the loss and how it makes you feel. Acknowledging your feelings, they are important. It doesn't mean that, you know, I think the fear there is usually that you would drown in them and never be able to recover, but that's not actually what happens. When you acknowledge them and you understand what's happening, it actually loses its power. And lament and prayer is something that has helped me. So I put that in there, and I have like an example of what the lament and prayer looks like on the next slide. Identifying your support system, what new roles have now come into play because of the things that that happened or that you lost, and then integrating memories and daily functioning. Talking about the lost thing and the lost people is not a bad thing. I think it's actually very healthy, and it helps people move through the grief. We're so quick to say, oh no, but you still have this. Oh no, but don't grieve as those without hope. You can say, hey, this really hurt. And also, that, and for someone to be able to hold that space for someone else without rushing them to, no, don't talk about that anymore, helps people um, actually transform that energy of sorrow. And I would also say that for the people who are grieving, they also need to maybe hear that, hey, even though this happened to you, I also see you doing this, and be reminded that, they survived it. Let's see. Then seeking professional help, of course. For burnout, I would definitely recommend to incorporate rest and breaks. Even the Lord rested on the seventh day, so please take some rest. Practice the power of pause. Self-compassion is important. Give yourself grace in those times when you can do all the things all at once. And usually, burnout is not, or ADHD and all the things we've talked about today is not about someone being lazy or too emotional. It's usually that what has happened, or the accumulation of the things that have happened, have now overwhelmed their capacity to handle it. All right. Then seeking medical assistance, which is really important in burnout and in all these other conditions, because sometimes your actual body becomes depleted when you're going through those things. So seeking medical assistance is important. Identifying energy drains, self-care, and all of that. Oh, I quickly skipped. And then just mindset tips. For me personally, even though I know that it's not, this is just, for the sake of this conversation, having a growth mindset, I think, is important with anything that you're dealing with. And of course, um, it doesn't diminish the feelings and the emotions in any way, but knowing that even if you are feeling this way right now, it won't always be the case really helps. Or understanding that, okay, I'm not feeling the best or back to where I was, but then where I was yet, the power of yet is usually a big one in the growth mindset. Or that I can put things in place that help me. I can put some structure in place and all of that. Even for kids, learning the growth mindset and being able to show them that they will not be there where they are forever, that there is hope, is important. And knowing that our capacity can always expand because we are adaptable as humans. And quick lament prayer, complain to God. What happened? How did you feel? What was the hardest part for you? And then expressing your belief and what you want to believe will happen for the future. That's maintaining hope even when you are in grief or in despair, or don't know where to go with all these things happening. All right. Fallon, please give us the ADHD tips. We are over time. Oh my God, a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
so
are.
just some ADHD tips here. The
Mhm.
first one I would say is use your calendar and your alarm. Those have been the biggest game changers for me, because if it's not in my calendar, it doesn't exist. When people say out of sight, out of mind, it's a real thing. So use visual cues, visual reminders. The alarm, like even when I'm cooking, for example, because after 10 minutes, I probably forgot that I'm cooking. So if I haven't set my alarm to remind me to go back and check, there's going to be a problem. So yeah, I would definitely say use those. Also, break tasks into small tasks. So, for example, set a timer 10 minutes and just give yourself 10 minutes to get a certain task done, whether it's sending 2, 3 emails within that 10 minutes or 25 minutes, however long you want to give yourself, but just kind of break them down. Sometimes you can just play games with your brain, make it like a fun game, for example. So, how much can I get done in this set amount of time? And that again will give you that dopamine kick, which is something that is beneficial for ADHD because you tend to lack dopamine. Another big thing that I found very helpful is body doubling. So basically just having somebody either physically next to you, or it could be virtually as well. So you could join like a Zoom call, for example, be on Zoom together and just both working alongside each other. Just having somebody there to check in, hold you accountable. If you can't do body doubling at the same time, then maybe just an accountability partner that, you can check in maybe each day or each week, just to be like, have you done this? Have you done that? So that can be really helpful as well. Also, clutter, because visual clutter can also have quite a negative impact you know, it makes you, once you have the visual clutter, it makes you feel mentally cluttered as well. So having like a clutter tray where you can just pop things that are just in your way, so it can be, you can move it out the way, but also making your home. So, for example, one thing I would say is find what works for you without the shame. So, for example, if you need to have a cleaner that comes in and helps you each week to keep the place a little bit more organized, then do that. Don't feel shame about it, because people tend to feel like, oh, people are going to think, oh, you know, I think I'm living luxurious or whatever the case may be. But if it works for you and it helps you, and then through that you're able to take care of what else you need to take care of, whether that's your business or things around the home, or you know, your kids or whatever the case may be, then do that. So I would always say, try and take away the shame and the guilt and just work with your brain. Find what works for you. Also build routines. So again, like I've literally kind of automated my home so that it works for me. So for example, I use Alexa to help me with things, you know, so it'll be like a voice, like she'll say things that can help me. So just things, just have routines in place that works for you. And also another thing that goes, sometimes you don't really realize, but asking for written instructions can help you when it comes to trying to prioritize. So you can kind of lay everything out and say, okay, this is what I need to get done. What do I need to prioritize more? Sometimes having verbal instructions, it can go over your head, and then, you know, you're already struggling trying to remember everything. So that can be helpful. And again, like I said, self-compassion, you know, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, give yourself time. It's a learning process. You're not going to figure out over time, but you know, your brain, just find what works for your brain. And I just want to say as well, just give yourself grace.
All right. So this is just some places where you can seek support. We put some UK-based resources and some Georgia-based resources and just general mental health resources. So if anyone wants to take a picture of that, we'll maybe take one burning question. And Dr. Nandi, what do you think about timing?
I think just for the sake of time, because we're past time, so people
Mhm.
can come back the next time we call them.
Okay.
Um, we can continue questions in inside of the WhatsApp group.
Mm-hmm.
I know both of you are in the community, and so I put the link to join the community in the chat. Let's continue the conversation in there for anybody who has questions. And I see Fallon put her LinkedIn, so
Mm-hmm.
you can directly reach out as well. We encourage that,
Yeah.
you know,
And
and
just
we.
disclaimer,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing your traits does not confirm ADHD. There is a lot of overlap and a lot of other comorbid disorders as well. So, you know, do seek professional guidance and get an appropriate assessment or referral if you're questioning. So I just wanted to put that.
Yes.
Yes, that's important to put that out. Please make sure you don't assume anything. This.
Yes, do not go to the TikTok doctor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All
Well,
right.
go ahead,
Thank
Letitia. You can
Yes.
go.
Thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to continuing to have these conversations with you. Feel free to ask follow-up questions in the group or personally. And yeah, we're glad to have you today. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much, Letitia. Thank you, Fallon. We appreciate both of you for your time. Um, I'll quickly jump through the announcements. Normally, the presenters will, but for the sake of time, again, if you're not in our WhatsApp community, please join. The link is in the chat. Click on the link. We'll get you through. The process will not be as quick as before because we've had miscreants try to get funny. So now we're verifying everybody before we let you in. But go ahead and still click on the link, and you know we'll want to have the community. But we're taking extra steps now to make sure the community is safe. But the biggest thing we have coming up is our annual summit. It's coming up September 4th to 6th, and we want everybody to go ahead. The early bird tickets are now on sale. The link is also in the chat. Please go ahead and get your tickets. We've set it up to where you can actually pay over time. We have the pay later option. Now, somebody might be asking, well, why are we charging for this? Because the last times we've never charged for it. That's because as a growing organization, we need funds. So you're not just paying for the event, you're also helping us be able to continue doing the work, this kind of work that we're doing, putting things together, making sure that the organization keeps running. And our summits are typically, or our events typically over deliver for, for what we give. And so we want you to please see this as a contribution, as a way of supporting the work we're doing beyond just buying the tickets. We're going to be having, again, 3 packed days, 2 days of master classes and deep dive sessions, and then general sessions with incredible speakers. Again, go back through our past summits to see some of the pictures and clips of it. They're always very incredible, and the feedback is always great. So it's always something you're going to have a time. So if you're on the fence, go ahead. You're doing it. You're going to be equipping yourself, but you're also going to be supporting an excellent course for our community. So please go ahead and share the tickets. And if you also want to partner with us, we are opening up an ambassador program where we're leveraging like people who want to help us sell tickets and get a commission for that. We would love to connect with you as well. So you feel like you know people that can buy tickets, then get rewarded for that. Maybe that will cover the cost of your own tickets. It's going to be an exciting time. We're going to have our gala, our first ever gala. We've been trying to do this for 3 years, so we're finally doing it. We have a few things that we integrated into the summit this year. And so make sure you are in the room and you're part of it. But the link, please copy the link. Go ahead and purchase your tickets, or think about it. Would love to have everyone in the room for that. But with that said, thank you all so much again. Thank you for staying beyond the time. Thank you, Letitia. Thank you, Fallon, for doing this. This was incredible. Look forward to doing more incredible sessions. And please, everyone, remember every Saturday except the last Saturday, we have masterclasses. So even if you don't see any even if you don't know what's going on, trust me, on Saturdays by 2 p.m. Eastern time, we're always here having conversations. So just look for the link and then join and tell somebody about the work we're doing at AIM. You are the biggest marketing machine that we have. Till next week, God bless you and enjoy the rest of your evening or afternoon, or for the UK folks, good night.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if anyone wants to stay and say hi, because I don't know who all was here, I'll just like stop sharing and then say
Yeah,
hi.
I'll stop the recording and we can hang out and still keep talking.
Yeah, if you have more time. Mm-hmm.